You ever notice how quiet it gets when there's no one left to pretend for? Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the other one. The kind that settles in your chest, that makes the air feel heavy, that reminds you you're the only one left in the room. And the room is still full of your noise. This isn't about loneliness. That's just a symptom. I'm talking about solitude. Real solitude. The kind that doesn't knock on your door. It just moves in one day and never leaves. It eats dinner with you, sleeps next to you, walks with you in every empty street. Nobody teaches a man what to do when that happens, because most men don't talk about it. And the ones who do usually don't sound like they made it back in one piece. Let me show you something most people can't see, because they've never been far enough into the silence to notice. Solitude doesn't change your schedule. It doesn't just mess with your mood. It rewires you. And not in some poetic, he found himself kind of way. It rips things out of you. It exposes cracks you didn't know were there. It makes you look at your reflection and wonder, was I ever real or just reacting to everyone else's eyes? Do you really know who you are? Or have you only seen yourself in other people's mirrors? Think about that. Let it sting a little. Before we go further, if any part of this already makes sense to you, if you felt this kind of silence press against your ribs, then subscribe, turn on notifications. Not because I have answers, but because sometimes it helps just knowing someone else made it out. And now, let's talk. It usually starts on a Tuesday. Gray light leaking through the blinds. Not dark, not bright, just tired. The kind of light that makes you check the clock twice because you're not sure if it's morning or almost night. The house is clean. Not because you're tidy, but because cleaning gives your hands something to do while your mind tries not to feel like it's drowning. A coffee's been cold for an hour. Still, the mug stays on the table, right next to the chair where you've been sitting without saying a word for 4 days. You stopped talking to yourself at some point. At first, there were jokes, narrating your cooking like some late-night Food Network host. You laughed at your own sarcasm, but even that feels off now. Because when no one's there to hear it, you start to wonder if the sound of your own voice is proof of something breaking. The fridge hums like it always did, but now it feels louder, like it's the only one who hasn't left. You start to notice the floor creaks under your steps, how the heater sighs like a tired old man. Even silence isn't silent anymore. It wraps around you, follows you from the bedroom to the bathroom, waits for you by the door when you come back from nowhere. There's a pile of mail near the entrance. Nothing important, just letters addressed to resident. Even the world outside seems to forget your name. The walls are full of framed things, certificates, photos, things that once made you feel important. Now they just stare back. You start sleeping in the middle of the bed. At first, it felt wrong. Now it feels empty in a different way. You wake up without urgency. You move like you're trying not to wake anyone, but there's no one there. Hasn't been for a while. Meals become patterns. Eggs, toast, repeat. Not because you love it, because you don't want to think. Thinking is loud when there's no conversation to cover it. Even your footsteps change. You walk softer, slower. Not sneaking, just careful, like the floor might break if you step too hard. Mirrors become strange. You avoid them some days. Other days you stare too long. You start to wonder, is that really me? The silence doesn't answer. It never does. But it waits, patient. Like it knows that if it stays long enough, you'll start to speak. Not out loud, not at first, but deep down in that place you usually keep locked under noise, smiles, and weekend plans. Out there, you had an identity. Here, you just have yourself. And most days, you're not sure what that means anymore. There was a time when being alone meant something else. It wasn't failure. It wasn't exile. It was a choice. A man would leave the village, walk into the mountains, and disappear for a while. Not because he had no one, but because he needed to meet himself without an audience. There were rules back then, rituals. You lit a fire at dawn. You prayed when the sun moved. You built something with your hands. You watched the wind. Even the silence had shape. Even solitude had ceremony. They called it retreat, not escape. And when that man returned, people listened, because he went somewhere they didn't have the courage to go. But now a man ends up alone because the group chat goes quiet, because she stops texting, because the job ended, because no one invited him this time. And when he returns, nobody notices. He didn't go find himself. He just disappeared. That's the difference. Solitude used to be structured. You fasted. You chopped wood. You wrote long letters to no one. Your mind had rails to run on. But now, there's no structure. Just time. Too much of it, and a phone full of silence. We're told it's good to be alone. Time to recharge. Self-care. Protect your peace. But what they mean is be alone for an hour, with music, a podcast, a smoothie bowl. They don't mean this. They don't mean the quiet that sits next to you at dinner, or follows you into the shower, or lays beside you at night and whispers, "This is it now." Ancient men had solitude inside a story. Modern men have solitude without a script. And that's dangerous. Because without a script, your mind writes its own. And it doesn't always write in ink. Sometimes it uses knives. The old world moved slow. You left for 6 months, came back, the town was still there. Your role was still there. But now, miss a few birthdays, a few weddings, and the entire map changes. Conversations you can't follow. Inside jokes you're no longer inside of. You're replaced without anyone noticing. And social media? It was supposed to help, but it didn't. Now your absence is public. Now you watch the party from your phone. Now you scroll through proof that the world kept spinning without you. Back then, a man alone was a seeker. Now, he's a ghost. Even the labels changed. We used to call them monks. Now we call them weird, or off, or depressed, even if they're not. Because we don't understand silence anymore. We think if someone's not online, they must be broken. But maybe they're just watching. Maybe they're building something inside that doesn't need likes to survive. Still, it's harder now, because modern solitude isn't respected. It's not part of a tradition. It's not honored. It's just there, empty, unwitnessed, unexplained. And that makes it feel like failure, even when it's not. He pauses before unlocking his door, not because he forgot something, but because that threshold between the outside and his private world takes effort to cross. He grips the keys differently now, like they mean more than access, like they're the only proof he still belongs somewhere. Inside, his shoes land in the same spot every day. Precise, mechanical. Not out of habit, but because small routines are anchors when everything else drifts. He opens the fridge not to eat, but to stare, then closes it, as if what he's really looking for can't be refrigerated. He talks to the cashier longer than he should, asks how their day's going, comments on the weather. Not because he cares, but because the rhythm of small talk used to be muscle memory. Now it's choreography he has to relearn. He eats the same dinner 3 nights in a row, not because he loves it, but because making new decisions feels like lifting something too heavy with fingers too tired. He forgets how he used to sit at restaurants. Alone now, he takes the corner booth, back against the wall, eyes on the door. Not out of fear, just instinct. He walks slower when he's around people. Not out of leisure, but uncertainty. Like he's re-entering a world that kept evolving while he stood still. He stares at his phone. Not for notifications, just the light, the glow, the sense that something, anything, might pull him back in. He turns on the washing machine even when nothing's dirty. The sound is company, a low mechanical heartbeat to fill a room that doesn't echo anymore, because there's nothing left to bounce off. He leaves the TV on, but doesn't watch it. He just wants voices in the house, even fake ones. He sleeps on one side of the bed, then slowly migrates to the middle, then back. Like his body remembers someone used to be there, but can't quite recall who. He spends more time in mirrors than before, not for vanity, but recognition, trying to see the man everyone else used to see. His grocery list shrinks, the variety disappears. He buys the same toothpaste, the same bread, the same frozen meal because it's easier to manage familiarity than negotiate preference alone. He stops checking the weather. There's no one to plan around, no one to ask, should we bring jackets? He lets his voicemail fill up, not because he's too busy, but because the silence feels safer than whatever those messages might say. He starts replying late, then not at all. Not out of anger, just fatigue. From being someone to others when he's barely someone to himself. He hears noises at night, but doesn't investigate. Not because he's brave, because part of him almost hopes someone's finally come looking. He finds old photos in drawers and stares at them too long. Not out of nostalgia, but disbelief. That those smiles were once real, that he was once there, in the middle of something that had weight. He notices the paint peeling in the hallway and doesn't fix it, because fixing things now feels like shouting into a canyon. He walks past mirrors without flinching, not because he likes what he sees, but because the shock has worn off. He stops posting online, not because he has nothing to say, but because speaking into the void is lonelier than the silence. He gets dressed less often, showers at odd hours, not out of laziness, but because time here has no lines, no borders, just space. He doesn't cry, but sometimes he feels it right behind the eyes, and instead of letting it out, he swallows hard, because breaking alone feels like falling where no one can find you. Nobody tells you this. Solitude doesn't break you with noise. It breaks you with stillness, and it doesn't ask permission. It arrives quietly and starts rearranging things inside you before you even realize what's missing. At first, it feels like peace. Then it starts to rot. You start to think you're becoming stronger, more self-aware, more independent, and maybe you are, but you're also becoming something else, something no one warned you about. Detached, not cold, not numb, just distant. Like a man who still sees the world, but through a glass window no one else knows is there. You begin to trust silence more than people, because silence never disappointed you. Silence never left. You stop missing the sound of someone's voice and start fearing it, because you know how much it could stir up again. You don't hate connection. You just don't remember how to do it. The truth? You're not lonely anymore. You're comfortable in your own mind. But comfort isn't clarity. Comfort isn't healing. Comfort is what grows after the pain becomes too familiar to fight. And in that comfort, you forget how to be seen. You forget how to be touched, not just physically, emotionally. Someone asks how you are, and your answer is smooth, practiced, distant. I'm fine. And maybe you are, but not in the way they mean. You've stopped looking for people to save you. You don't want rescue. You want space, even from the parts of you that used to crave affection. And in that space, you become dangerous. Not in the way people think, not violent, not cruel, but self-sufficient to a fault. Because when you learn to survive without anyone, you start to believe you don't need anyone. And that lie, that quiet, dignified, seductive lie, it's the most dangerous part, because it makes you proud of a wound you never actually healed. It makes you mistake avoidance for mastery. You start to walk through life like a ghost, visible, functional, even respected, but untouchable. You smile, you nod, you show up, but you don't let anyone in because you remember what happened last time, when someone got close, when you softened, when you cared, and you remember how long it took to put the pieces back together, alone, on a Tuesday, with the fridge humming and the coffee cold. So now, you stay whole by staying hidden. And maybe you think that's wise, that you've matured, that you've learned. But what you've really learned is how to disappear with grace. What you've really mastered is vanishing in plain sight. The irony? The man who survives solitude becomes the man least likely to be saved. Because he doesn't look broken. He doesn't cry for help. He doesn't scream into the night. He just fades, quietly, elegantly, until one day, someone realizes they haven't heard from him in a while. And even then, he's probably fine, still breathing, still functioning, still folding his laundry, still paying his bills. But something is missing, something human, something vital, something soft. And he knows it, he feels it, he just doesn't know how to want it anymore. Because solitude doesn't take things violently. It doesn't rip. It erodes a little more each day until you're still there, but not really there. You're the shadow of a man who once believed in something fragile, and when it broke, he vowed never to touch it again. It's strange how quiet can feel louder than a crowd. Strange how a man can feel lighter after letting go of everything he thought he needed, and yet heavier too. Not from pain, from awareness, from the weight of finally seeing what's underneath when no one's watching. And maybe that's where we really begin. Not when we're surrounded, but when we're stripped. When the noise dies down, and all that's left is your own breath, your own thoughts, your own name, spoken by no one. There's no glory in that space, no applause, no one handing out medals for staying sane in silence. But that doesn't make it meaningless. Maybe the absence of meaning is what makes it real. Because not everything we live needs to become a lesson. Not everything broken needs to be explained. Sometimes you just sit with it. You just breathe with it. You stop trying to fix. You stop trying to escape. You let the silence say what it needs to say. And you listen, not for answers, but for the echo of something you forgot how to hear. You, the version of you that isn't performing, isn't planning, isn't reaching, just being. No mask, no mirror, no narrative. That version's not flashy, not clever, not impressive, but it's real. And maybe that's enough. Because when the dust settles, when the noise fades, when everyone else has gone home, what you're left with is you. And if you can sit in that quiet without needing to run, without needing to explain, without needing to prove anything to anyone. That's something. That's not weakness. That's not loneliness. That's presence. And it's rare. Most people fill their lives so they never have to find it. They schedule every hour, scroll every silence. Talk to avoid hearing their own heartbeat. But you didn't. You sat. You stayed. And maybe that's the beginning of something the world forgot how to value. Stillness. Not the curated kind. Not the marketed kind. The real kind. The messy, unshaped kind that doesn't come with hashtags or healing plans. Just a man in a chair. On a Tuesday. Breathing. So maybe the question was never, can you be alone? You already answered that. You sat in the silence. You stayed through the static. You let it show you parts of yourself that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. That takes something. Not everyone does it. Not everyone can. But now comes the harder part. Not surviving the solitude, but deciding what to do with what it gave you. Will you hold it like a secret? Or will you let it shape how you show up in the world again? Will you return softer or harder? More guarded or more honest? Will you keep disappearing even when people are around? Or will you let someone see the version of you that silence helped uncover? It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering you've always been more than who the world expected you to be. You just couldn't hear it until everything else got quiet. And now you know. Now it's your choice. You don't need anyone to understand it. You don't need to explain it. But maybe, just maybe, you don't have to carry it alone either. If any part of this stayed with you, if even one line made you feel like someone finally put words to something you've lived but never spoken, then this is your space too. You don't have to comment. You don't have to share. Just stay close. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Let the algorithm do what it does and bring you back when it's time. Because the next video might meet you in another quiet place you didn't know you were walking toward. And maybe I'll see you there. Not as a voice, not as a teacher, just as someone who's been where you are. That's it for today. Breathe deep, and I'll see you in the next video that's about to appear on your screen.